Hey everyone, welcome back to iOSCoding. Today we are diving into the world of Metal as a Service or Maas. If you ever wondered how you can efficiently manage your physical servers, this video is definitely for you. What exactly is Maas? Maas stands for Metal as a Service, which is an open source program developed by Canonical, the same makers of Ubuntu. It lets you manage your physical servers as they were the virtual machines. Think about any of your favorite cloud provider, for example Amazon, Azure or Google Cloud, where you can manage virtual machines as per your needs. You can spin them off or you can provision them, reconfigure them as per needs. In a similar fashion, the Maas lets you do everything what you could do in a cloud environment with the physical servers. Now if you think about it, traditionally if you had the bare metal servers plugged in ready for the OS installation, you had to go through all the servers one by one and then manually install the operating systems. And if you can imagine working in a data center where you had to provision hundreds or thousands of servers every day, the amount of workload would be tedious. This is exactly where the Maas comes in. Maas takes favorite operating system which you want to deploy on the bare metal servers, and it actually provisions those servers based on the instructions you provided. We'll deep dive into the components of Maas shortly. Something I will strongly suggest is you do not mix Maas with any type of hypervisor. Hypervisors, you can still install them on bare metal servers, yes, but Maas actually deals more with the actual physical servers. So you can install hypervisors, for example VMware, using the Maas, but Maas will not typically replace your VMware solutions. If you don't know what hypervisor is, I already have created a video in the playlist, or I will put a link in the description where you can watch it and then understand the virtualization technologies. Now let's talk about the components of Maas. First of all, the official site for Maas project is maas.io. If you head to there, you will see a bunch of links in there, and they have done an amazing job documenting in every single thing. So most likely if you have any questions or concerns, you will find your answers on the official website itself. So if we talk about the components of the Maas, we have usually two major components. One is called the region controller and the other one is called rack controller. The region controller is what hosts the Maas UI, web UI and the command line interface, and also the API services reside in there as well. So the region controller talks to the rack controller, which in turn talk to the underlying physical servers. Whatever operator requests from the region controller, that is forwarded to the rack controller, and eventually the execution of this is done by the rack controllers on the physical servers. We will go through the Maas UI once we will install the Maas in our test server. One more thing, since we do not have multiple physical servers to test it out, I will be simulating everything under VirtualBox. What we will do is we will install region and rack controller in one of the virtual machines, which will act as our primary region, and then instead of deploying the operating system on physical servers, we will create the shell VMs. The shell VMs in turn will talk to DHCP or Pixie boot provided by the rack controller, which will send the signals to the shell VMs to download the required operating system. We will go through all this process. If this looks too tedious or hectic, don't worry, at the end of this video you will have an excellent idea about how Maas works. Now let's get started to install the Maas in our lab. If you head out to maas.io, at the top you can see there's a link called install. If you click on it, here you will find the instructions how you can install Maas. There are actually two ways to install Maas. One is from the snap packages and the other one is you will have to manually install the required packages. In our lab environment, however, we will use the snap installation method. We will configure the Maas later on. Also, the Maas requires a PostgreSQL database to be there. Again, you have two options. You can set up a PostgreSQL database with hardened security as required in production, but for us we will use a test database. Here on our lab server, I'm logged in as a standard user. This is where we will install the Maas controller, the region controller and the rack controller on the same machine. I haven't done any fancy stuff on the server other than just creating two network connections, where one is our bridge network, the second one is the NAT network. The NAT network is what we will use to provision the virtual machines. or the shell VMs as we discussed previously. In order to install the Maas, all you have to do is sudo snap install Maas, and it will ask you for the sudo password. Apply the password, and the Maas installation has been begun. It's gonna download the packages and install it for you. Let's wait for it. Time to time, I might have to fast forward the video to save your time as well. Mine, because Maas installation and especially downloading the images can take much more longer depending on the bandwidth. Okay, as you can see in here, the Maas has been installed properly. If you do Maas init and see that we can actually run the Maas command line. As discussed before, we definitely need to have a PostgreSQL for the database, as shown in here as well. What we will do is next we will install the PostgreSQL database. We'll do sudo apt install PostgreSQL. Okay, so now we have the PostgreSQL. We can run the Maas init command again. If you remember, initially we talked about the Maas has two components, region controllers and rack controllers. You can initialize any of the servers as one. Usually you will have one or two region controllers for redundancy, but multiple rack controllers. Hence, in our lab we are limited with the resources. What we will do is we will use this server itself as both region and the rack controller. Another thing what we have to do is, if you haven't set up the database as per the instructions shown in here, Maas actually also lets you test things in a non-production environment by providing a test database. That is exactly what we will use in our case. So if we go back to the command line, you can see that we can install a test database using this command. So I will just paste the command in here, then hit enter key. Just to recap, what we have done so far is we installed the Maas packages, we installed the PostgreSQL database, and we installed a test database so we don't have to create the tables manually. Now we have everything. So what we will do is initialize our Maas with the region and rack controller, which will be talking to our test database. So you can run sudo Maas init region plus rack, which will initiate the region and the rack controllers, and database URI, that's where the Maas will store the information about images or discovered servers. Press enter key, and here it is asking you have multiple IP addresses, which one do you want to use? I will use the bridge network, so that's okay. I will say yes. Now the installation process might take a little longer, again depending on the virtual resources you have allocated to your VM. So be patient in here and then wait for this installation process to finish before we go further. Okay, so the installation process is done. We are one step away where Maas wants us to create an admin account through which we could log in into Maas UI. So what I will do is I will just type sudo Maas create admin. And the username, I'm just gonna put the iOSCoding. The password is your desired password. It will ask you to reconfirm the password, and I can put the email address as well. We don't have to import any keys, and that's pretty much it. So the installation for the Maas is done. Next we will log in into the Maas UI and explore the features of Maas. In order to access the Maas UI, we will head out to our browser and then to this URL. This is where the Maas was instructed to run with the port number 5240. Here it is asking us to enter the username information, which we just configured, and the password. If you're logging into the Maas utility for the first time, you will see this page. This is the initial setup configuration page where you have to go through certain steps to make sure the Maas is actually at ready state. One of the noticeable thing you have to do is it says the DHCP is not enabled on any VLAN, which is basically required to do the Pixie boot of your physical machines, or in our case we were using shell VMs. You have two options in there. Either you can create the DHCP server with the Pixie boot pointers to this server itself, or you can actually run the DHCP server on your own Maas controller as well. That's what we'll do next. For now, we have to go through these steps. So the region name, I'll just keep it server 1, or you can put it region 1 or the default region. The DNS forwarder is if you're using DNS connectivity and your machines don't have to internet, or the local server itself does not know, forward those queries. Save and continue. On this page, Maas is asking you to select some images of your choice so it can download, and these images in turn will be pushed to the physical servers, or in our case to the shell VM. So basically whatever you select to download in here, you will have an option to choose from and then deploy those images on the remote bare metal servers. So now I will just 22.04 LTS and let it finish downloading. You can also choose CentOS as well. Just in order to save some time, I will leave that unchecked and continue. As you can see, the Maas has been successfully set up, and we will click on finish setup. One last thing you have to do is you have to select the SSH key pair. This is required once you have provisioned the VMs. Using this SSH key pair, you will be able to log into the remote servers. What we will do is I will go in here. You can use GitHub key or then upload it. Here we will just simply create a new public key pair and then paste it in here. In order to create the public key pair, you can do SSH region -t RSA. Then I'm gonna just create a default key with 2048 bytes. That's fine. There's passphrase on it, and simply hit enter twice. Now what we will do is we will get the key which we just created and copy its value. I'll go back to the browser and we will paste it in here. And finally we will just say import SSH key. You can always change this SSH key once initial setup is done. I will show you where you can find these settings, and now click on finish setup. Once the initial configuration is done, you will see we have a bunch of options available on the left hand side in here. We will go through them one by one, but you don't have to know all of them all at once. We will discover them further as we go along. Another thing you have to notice is if you go to your profile, and this is the profile which we created as an admin, and go to SSH keys, this is where you can install or remove the keys as per your needs. Now before we start provisioning our servers, we have to go through a bunch of settings to ensure that our shell VMs, they know about the server. As we discussed earlier, we will need a DHCP server. Let's go through a few of the required settings one by one. If you head out to the settings page, here you can see we have the general information about our Maas controller. In the general section, you can choose the themes and other options as well. Under the commissioning, this is what tells the Maas to send the default image to endpoint or the bare metal servers. By default it will choose Ubuntu. Since we have only one image, so you do not see any other option in here. You can also pass some kernel parameters as well. Under security protocol, we don't need to know anything about it yet. If you're managing images for different platforms, for example Windows, you will need a KMS, which is the activation server. That's where your Windows host go to grab a activation key. You can place that FQDN of the activation server in here as well. Same thing for the VMware. You can put your ESXi's vCenter server, so once provisioned it will talk to the ESXi server which is mentioned in here. Under storage, you can choose the layout of the storage to be formatted on the bare metal servers, in our case the shell VMs. If you want to format your machines using the logical volume manager, you can choose that, and there are a bunch of other options available as well. DNS we already have configured at the initial setup phase, so we don't have to do anything about it. But if in case you have to change any DNS related stuff, you can come over to settings, and then under network the DNS section is there. Maas actually accepts different commissioning scripts as well. By default, these are provided. If you need some more advanced configuration, you can always check out their documentation and then alter these scripts or upload your own. We are not using any DHCP snippets yet, so that's okay. The package repo is something which is important and might catch your attention as well. If we go under images section in here, you can see we have only limited number of ISOs available to download and push it to the bare metal servers. What if you wanted to use, for example, your Windows operating system to be pushed to the bare metal servers? You don't see it in here, and that's exactly where the repos comes in. So you will put the location of the OS packages in here. Once the location is placed and the repositories are synced, you will have an option to download the desired images from under images section. Another important aspect of Maas is the network discovery. As the name states, wherever Maas is connected to on the subnet, it will continuously try to discover the new hosts on there. Usually the discovered devices are placed in two categories: devices and machines. Devices category is more suitable for devices which you cannot change, for example your Cisco switches or routers or the gateways. The machines will be the discovered servers, where you can discover a VM, a new VM, and then assign an operating system on it. If you go to the subnet section, you will see two fabrics connected. The fabrics, they represent the actual physical links on the Maas controller. In our case, this is a virtual machine, and I have connected two virtual next to it, so that's why the fabric 0 is actually on my main network, which is the bridge network. The fabric 1 is the network card number 2, which doesn't have DHCP, as you can see in here as well. This is the IP address we will use to provision the servers, and also DHCP server will be configured on this side. So basically we will not be using my other DHCP server, the main routers one. We will use the Maas controller to discover and PXE boot the VMs and install operating system on them. Now Maas has availability zones as well. These availability zones are not something what you see in AWS or other cloud providers. The availability zones in here are just the logical grouping of the resources. For example, you can have a availability zone called fault tolerant, or you can name it anything, but the idea in here is not to provide the redundancy. It's just the logical grouping of how you will place these servers. Similarly, under the pools, you can create multiple pools in here and then assign the machines into those pools. They don't do any fancy stuff. It's just the logical separation of the devices or the machine. If you head out to controller, you can see our server name, which is server.maas. For now, this is the region and rack controller. If you remember, we initiated Maas as a region and rack controller for the same server. You can get the information about your region and rack controller on this console. These are the services running on the server itself for now. As you can see, DHCPD is not running because we haven't configured it yet. Similarly, under networks, you can see different network cards associated to it, and the storage devices as well. You get the idea. So from the UI, you can add multiple controllers. As you can see in here, we have option to add a rack controller. Rack controller, as I said, they in turn talk to the region controller, which actually instructs the rack controllers to do the stuff. As we are limited on the resources, we will just stay with one rack controller and the region controller. Okay, enough talking. Now let's start configuring the VMs, and then we will see how things go from there. One thing we want to do is we want to limit the network discovery to our DHCP enabled subnet only, so none of other networks will be discovered. In order to do that, what you can do is go to network discovery, click on configuration, and here, since the network discovery is enabled, we will just select this IP address and click on save. Next thing for sure we need is a DHCP server, so our bare metal servers can PXE boot from it and then get an IP as well. In order to do that, what we will do is we will go to subnets and click on this subnet in here. Here we will have to reserve a range. We will click on the reserve range. I want to reserve first few IP addresses. Click on reserve, and also we will do a reserve a dynamic range as well. The starting IP will be let's say 20, and then the ending IP will be let's say 40. We have enough IPs for now. Once the configuration is done, we can go back and we will go actually to the controllers. Under controller, we will select our controller, and on the VLANs, here we will click on this untagged VLAN icon. As you can see, our reserved range has popped up in here. Now we have to actually configure the DHCP. So if you click on configure DHCP, here you will have to select the rack controller which you want to use as the DHCP server, and then click on configure DHCP. If we go back to our controller, the DHCP server should have been started by now. From here on, we should be able to provision our shell VM, or if you have a spare laptop or a physical server, you can try to hook them up on the same switch and then boot it up using PXE. Now we have pretty much everything to get started and creating the shell machine. So this is exactly what we will do. In order to create the shell VM, we will use VirtualBox in here. You got to remember one thing, because Maas is meant to be for physical servers, which means physical servers have advantage of advanced power configurations and also the CPU configurations as well, compared to what we will get in VirtualBox. So you may have to go through a slight pain of manually switching the power of your virtual machines once you have configured them. I will tell you what I mean once we go to that stage. But for now, let's try start creating a new machine. So in order to create a new machine, we will just click on new. In here, you can put any name. I will just say test, and then you can, on the type, we will select Linux, and since we have synced our Ubuntu image, and we will try to provision this VM with Ubuntu. Next, here you can set up the number of CPUs and the RAM. Disk size, we don't really care about it because we are in a testing phase only. Click on finish. Before you actually power it on, there are two things you have to ensure they are configured on this box. Number one is, if you go to the system, we need to make sure the network boot is enabled or the PXE boot is enabled. Based on the network link, we will connect our network card to the subnet where Maas is looking for the machines to be provisioned. So what we will do is, in this case, I will try to make the network priority on top. Second thing, in my testing, I found that if you don't have the EFI mode enabled, for some reason VirtualBox does not allow you to provision the VM shells. However, this wasn't the case in VMware Workstation or Workstation Pro. So if you're using VirtualBox, you will have to ensure that the EFI boot is enabled. And another thing you will have to do is, once it is enabled, for some reason the PXE boot is not picking up automatically, so you will have to go to the boot menu of the machine and then select the network boot from there, but we will go through that in a minute. Next, go to the network settings and ensure that your network adapter is connected to the same network where your Maas is configured to listen for provisioning requests. So in our case, I have configured the host only adapter for that purposes, and that's pretty much it. Then we will click on OK, start our VM, and let's see what happens. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So if we have the EFI boot mode configured, for some reason the network boot does not work automatically, what you have to do is you need to go into the boot menu by pressing any key and then go to boot manager. And then from here we will select the PXE boot. Here you can see the MAC address of your network interface card as well. Select enter, and then you will see the boot process going further. Now it's saying the NBP file has been downloaded successfully. It's actually fetching the net boot from the Maas. So here it's downloading some required files. In the Maas, you may not see anything yet. Let's see if we refresh our page. Probably there is no server as expected, because the initial discovery is still going on until the new shell machine has gone through first life cycle of Maas by detecting the stuff. So we will talk about different life cycles for the virtual machines or for the servers. This is the very first phase in which Maas is collecting the information about the shell VM. We don't have any data yet, so let's wait for this process to be completed. Again, the provisioning process is highly dependent on the resources. Since we are using the virtual environment, it's not really something you can actively think of provisioning thousands of machines, because you will be putting more resource constraints on your main server. So if you're testing this all in the lab environment, all you gotta do is be patient, let the jobs finish, and then determine your outcome afterwards. In the meantime, once Maas is doing its stuff, we can quickly go through the available cycles or different life cycles of a VM in Maas. So I have found this document as well, but also it's listed in more details in maas.io if you want. But usually these are the life cycles of a VM or a node you will see. The new is the latest state where Maas just discovers any host which you can provision, and the next step is commissioning. The commissioning is basically running the Maas scripts on the node so it can get the information about its CPU, hard disk, and NIC, etc. Once the commissioning is successful, the node goes to the ready state. Ready means the node is ready for the OS deployment. Usually, because we are doing this from a physical perspective, the physical servers, they have IPMI based or BMC credentials configured on the power supply. So basically Maas can actually control turning them on and off, so you don't have to do anything manually. Everything can be automated through scripts as well. Another stage we usually go through is the allocated stage. This is the stage where once the machine is ready, you can actually put a machine in allocated stage where the other user cannot take the ownership of that machine. So basically once you have allocated a machine, this solely belongs to that particular controller or the user. Next for the deploying is self-explanatory. Once you start deploying the OS, the machine actually gets into the deploying state until the OS installation is finished. Releasing is you can release it from the server or the shared pool once every other previous stages have been complete. Now let's see what else is happening with our machine on the other side. As you can see, our machine is powered off. This is actually an expected behavior, because when we talked about different life cycles of a node, Maas actually tries to control most of the power related inquiries on that particular node. In this case, if we go back to our UI and click on machines, or probably refresh our thing, you will see a new machine has been discovered. The name, because we did not put any name on it, so Maas actually generates a name for you. If you click on it, under configuration, you will see there is an issue. It says the this node does not have a power type set to Maas. So basically Maas is complaining that I don't know what to do with it. Either you give me some options or you manually control your power related stuff. What we will do is we will go to edit. Under power type, you can see bunch of power types are supported in here. These are the most common ones supported in production, but in our case, since we will be doing a manual power and power off, because VirtualBox does not provide us that option, so we will just select manual and click on save. We go back to the machines. Right now the machine is actually it will go through another commissioning state back again, because right now initially the Maas controller did not know about the state of our shell VM. But usually what happens is once the new stage has been achieved, we can put the machine into a commissioning mode. That's what we will do. So select the machine in here, go to actions, and then click on commission. Right now it just says because it has unconfigured power type. Let's see if we can go through. I'll just allow the switch to the machine so it will not power off unlike it did previously. Then we will retain the storage configuration as well. So let's see if it works. Okay, so if we click on and the submission button, go back, it says the state has been changed from new to commissioning. But of course, because we were running a machine on a shell VM, there's nothing happening to the VM itself. So all you have to do is restart this machine, and then we will go to the boot menu to Pixie boot it manually as we did previously. Here it's asking you to press enter key to go to the boot menu. We will go to boot manager, and then here we will select the same NIC as we did previously. This is going to be a lengthy process, so once the boot process starts, I will try to fast forward the video to save the time. Again, the provisioning process can take hours as well, depending on the underlying hardware. In this case, since we are running everything virtually, you can expect things to take a little longer. But since we have selected our power type to not to shut down the VM, so I'm expecting that once this stage of the commissioning is done, the server is not shut down. But even though if it shuts down, now our Maas has a database entry about this VM. In our case, this is VM, but in production it will be like a physical machine. But for the what matters is the entry changes from new state to ready state, and the commissioning state is already jumped. In the ready state, we can definitely install an OS on these bare metal servers. One thing you might be finding that provisioning the machines using Maas is probably bit slower. Let's say if you are just a developer and looking to set up an development environment where you can quickly provision machines, and then all you want is just to get going with your development process rather than installing operating systems as per your needs. I definitely agree with you, but think about the Maas solution from a physical server's point of view, because even though we are doing everything what we can in virtual environment just to test, since we don't have that many hardwares are available, but if you think about it from the physical server's point of view, where you have to provision thousands of servers every day or probably weekly basis, then this is definitely the product you want to go with it. And even for me, in our testing environment, I have seen sometimes it performs really good, and then even though you have different products available, for example Vagrant or other provisioning tools as well, like you can use LXTs as well, as we discussed earlier, Maas has its own importance from a physical point of view. If you guys are interested, I can create another video for Vagrant related stuff, where Vagrant lets you actually quickly deploy virtual machines instead of physical servers. You can quickly deploy virtual machines, so you can get going with your deployment or development instead of actually configuring the servers. It will provide you a base image. Stay tuned to my channel. I might come up with other videos. If you really like this video, if it's informative to you, drop a like and then put a comment of the technology you want me to explore and present to you in more simpler way. I will try to bring the topics, and all I'm here is to help you guys and just revise what I already have learned throughout my career as well. I will really appreciate if you drop a like on the video. Okay, so the provisioning system is saying it has reached the target cloud init target. So this is exactly what we were looking for. Unlike previously, when the target was achieved, the power was shut down. So this is why we said, okay, allow SSH by the Maas and then don't shut down the server. Go back to our server and see what is happening in the console. If you see right now, the machine has been changed from new to commissioning to ready state. This is the stage where you can actually deploy the operating system on the server. So if I select the server itself, go to actions, and then I can select deploy. Before I select deploy, we can go through different tabs. Even up there, you can see this shell VM has only one NIC installed. There's no advanced power configurations. We already saw that. And then some of the PCI devices listed in there, USBs, and then storage devices. Okay, now let's click on deploy. And here, if you had multiple images, of course, you could have selected those. But since we have only one architecture, one release, and then one operating system, we can simply deploy it to disk. This option lets you register your provisioned node as a KVM host. If you don't know what KVM is actually a kernel-based virtual machine and open source virtualization technology. So what you can do is simply you can run virtual machines within that host. So remember, we were talking about virtualization technologies such as VMware ESXi, and there are certain open source technologies are available as well, which is the KVM is one of them. So if you do this, Maas will do everything automatically for you and then register the deployed host as a KVM host. We're not going to use that because we don't have enough RAM or hard disk space on that host. What we will do is just simply select our OS and then pretty much do a deploy machine. Again, if you remember, the deployment probably has been begun in the console, but nothing is happening on the actual server. That is because if you remember, our power supply is manually controlled. So in this case, what we will do is simply we will go to the machine and then reset it. Again, we have to go through the boot manager to make sure the correct MAC address of the NIC is selected. Now this time, instead of downloading the initial Cloud Init files, this server will actually be downloading the actual Ubuntu operating system. Once the operating system is downloaded, you would be able to SSH into it. An IP address will be assigned from the DHCP server, which we configured earlier in the Maas controller. The SSH, usually the default username for Ubuntu machines is Ubuntu, so you should be able to SSH into it using that username and the SSH key which we provided earlier. The provisioning process has been finished. As you can see, our server is back up and online. Also, if we check into the server console for the Maas UI, you can see the server is listed in there. Don't worry about the power stage because Maas is just complaining, saying it cannot determine the current power state of the shell VM which we configured earlier. Now that's it for today's deep dive into the Metal as a service. We hope that you found this video informative and now you have a better understanding of Maas. Again, this is not the end of the world. There will be new features installed. It's not possible to go through every single use cases of Maas, so keep exploring, keep doing the good job, and then eventually you will find what you are looking for. Remember, whether you're managing a small set of servers or maybe a large scale data center, right, Maas can always assist you, and it can save hours and hours of your time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and then share it with your friends or colleagues. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well. I will try to bring some more exciting topics to cover in the future. Thank you very much.